have, good evening, everyone, and those of you who came out, thank you very much for being here. We have two meetings this evening. We first have to conduct our reorganization meeting, so I have the honor of opening the meeting. I'll ask Ms. Callahan to take the roll call first.
Certainly, Dr. Mooney. Mrs. Sloan? Mrs. Johnson? Here. Mr. Baer? Mr. Greenstein? Mr. Hohauser? Mrs. Nadolny? And our new board member to be sworn in. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Ms. Weisberg. Sworn in.
Mic work? Oh. All right, we're going to ask Ms. Callahan to swear in our new board members first. Thank you.
So we will have Elizabeth Weisberg and our two returning board members, Nora Johnson and Lawrence Greenstein. I'll hand you your notices to please speak verbally and sign at the appropriate place.
I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask for a nomination for Board of Education President. Mrs. Johnson?
I nominate Karen Sloan.
Okay, Mr. Baer, second. Call to vote. 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Mrs. Sloan.
Thank you.
And now I am going to hand over the meeting to Mrs. Sloan.
Thank you. Are we waiting for both officers to swear in? Yes. So now we would have a nomination for Vice President. I'm going to call on myself and nominate Nora Johnson. Do I have a second? Mr. Hohauser or Mr. Baer, anyone? And all in favor? 6-0. Thank you. Congratulations.
And if it's all right with you, I will also include the superintendent in this swearing in and the assistant deputy clerk.
I do solemnly swear that I will
I just want to take a moment to say thank you to the board, to my colleagues on the board. It has been such a pleasure to serve on the board, and serving with Nora as vice president. I feel like we were a very strong team last year through a lot of challenges. And while I know we will face more challenges in the coming year, I feel like the board, along with the administration and everyone in the school district and the community, we really showed last year through the bond effort what can happen when we all work together, and we can do incredible things, and I know we will in the coming year as well. So thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much to my fellow board members, and I look forward to continuing in the position of vice president. I think we are a great team, and I think we are a great board, and I think there's a great administration in place, and I look forward to another 3 years. Well, 1 more year as vice president, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion for the adoption of the reorganizational agenda. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0. Okay, thank you. And now I will make a motion for item, where am I? Item 9 through 60. Do I have a second? Mr. Holhauser. What? Pulling out 58. Second, Mr. Holhauser, all in favor? 6-0. Okay, thank you. Now I will move for item 58. Do I have a second? Mr. Greenstein, we have discussion?
My recollection is that the intent of the 30% waiver was for both groups.
And we'll move to the regular meeting. And we already saluted the flag and did the roll call, so we're really rolling. I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, July 1st, 2015. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0. And we will now have the opportunity for student and community comments. Please identify yourself for the record, and we have a 3-minute limit even in the summer.
Good evening. My name is Adrienne Sauer. I'm a parent of, I guess now, a 4th grade girl at Daly and a 7th grade girl at Weber. Now that the new session of the Board of Ed has begun, I hope that the board and the administration will find ways to bring additional directors to our district. For those who don't know, we have directors of creative arts, health, physical education, and guidance. Dr. Westervelt is wonderful. But when she is pulled in so many directions by literacy, social studies, foreign language, ENL, which is formerly, I guess, ESL or EOL, science, technology, engineering, and math, she cannot possibly dedicate sufficient time to each discipline. I'm advocating for 2 additional directors, one for STEM and another for the humanities, to oversee the curriculum from school to school and grade to grade. Directors can provide the proper oversight for proper scaffolding. Think about how creative arts has flourished in Port Washington by having a director of creative arts. We have Hearts, Port Washington, which does its annual Port Fest fundraiser and festival, Night of 1,000 Strings, and I guess the new district band performance in 2016. Recognition from the Grammy Foundation selecting Schreiber as one of the 100 Grammy Signature Schools semifinalists for its outstanding commitment to music education, and recognition by NAMM as one of 388 school districts in the U.S. for the best communities for music education. Imagine what we could achieve with STEM and humanities directors. Let's focus on STEM for now, where our district is behind the times. We currently only offer one science class, AP Computer Science A. There are no other classes at Schreiber, and there are no classes at Weber. My understanding is that there aren't even department chairs for technology at Weber or Schreiber, let alone a technology director. Although we have math and science research programs at the high school, we need someone to ensure that our students are prepared for the challenges of research with a cohesive math and science curriculum during elementary and middle school. Would the process of selecting a math program have gone smoother if we had a director overseeing the project? Who is focused on the current PGCD of the research program? I understand that funding is an issue in these fiscally challenging times. Please consider that Schreiber department heads teach lighter course loads. I've heard that they teach as few as 2 classes instead of 5, while Weber department chairs teach a full schedule and receive stipends of close to $9,000. Could some of these funds be reallocated towards directors? Our society now needs more computer programmers, engineers, and scientists. We need to help create these opportunities for our children. Having a STEM director will put us on the right path. Thank you.
If there are no other community comments at this time, we will move on. I just wanted to say that it's great to see so many people out tonight in the summer, and I hope that everyone noticed on the agenda we have formed the board committees, and we will be voting on them tonight. I don't know that we will be meeting over the summer or not on any of the committees, but we will be meeting as a board to form our board goals and have that be in sync with the superintendent's goals. And when we have completed that, it will be up on the website for everyone to see. And the committee work will go under the board goals to complete what it is we want for each committee. So please stay tuned to all of that, and we'd love any of your feedback for any of it. And I think beyond that, nothing has really happened that I need to comment on since graduation, but all the graduations really were lovely, and we thank all the staff that participated. And I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan. Yeah, we had a wonderful end of the year. Fabulous events, very wonderful time for our families and for our students. We're looking forward to a great new year. This is our new year. And we have lots planned. We have a busy summer. And we're just finalizing a lot of the hiring, getting ready, believe it or not, for September. And I think we're on a really good path. Ms. Fennick, if you could just give us a very brief update on the kindergarten enrollment. Our student enrollment has not really changed since our last meeting.
I'm sorry, I can't pull up the actual numbers on my phone. But our kindergarten enrollment really hasn't changed much since last month, maybe only by 1 or 2. So we're still under the projected number at this point. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion for the approval of minutes for June 9, 2015. Second, Mrs. Johnson. All in favor? 5-0. Mrs. Callahan, I don't know if you took note, but Mr. Hohauser had to leave. Okay. Now we'll move to the discussion item with the bond update. I don't know, Mary, are you going to lead us?
Certainly. Mr. Astano and I have spent a good portion of our time, along with teachers and administrators from both the high school and middle school, meeting with several representatives from BBS, the architects selected to do our bond work. Those gentlemen are Frank Giacchetto, Larry Salverson, and Jim Wadig. All 3 gentlemen are here this evening. They would like to provide to you the status of where we are both at the high school and middle school relative to science room redesigns, auditorium redesigns, and I'm not sure if we have anything relative to field work, but I'm sure they will touch upon that as well. I'm not sure, Larry, will you be beginning, or will Frank? Or Jim? All right.
Yeah,
Jim
right now
Wade.
we're approaching the start of the last phase of work from the, believe it or not, 2012 bond, where we are getting into the Susser Elementary School, Guggenheim Elementary School, Schreiber High School, and Weber to do some much-needed toilet room renovations and some nurse's office renovations to provide for handicapped toilets in those spaces, and as well as doing some miscellaneous upgrades to mechanical systems at those buildings as well. Those contracts have been bid and awarded. We've had our construction kickoff meeting, so that work will be starting within the next few weeks. And we will also be starting work at the Schreiber High School on the roof over the gymnasium and over the science wings. That work will also be starting in the next few weeks with some gearing up with materials and showing up to do some, first off, abatement work. That work will be happening right away. So when those projects for the 4 schools, as far as the toilet room renovations go and the ADA work are done, that will finalize the extent of work that was in the 2012 bond, and that will be moving on into the current bond work. Are there any questions on that work we'll be doing this summer? Thank you.
So, you have a visual presentation. I don't know, does the board want to move around to the front so you don't pain your necks, or if you're comfortable where you are, we'll just go right ahead. So. This is a general overall bond update on the beginning of the process with the high school and middle school science rooms and auditorium design development process. Throughout May and June, we met with the staff concerning the science rooms. We actually had 5 meetings with the high school staff and 4 with the middle school staff, and here's your dates. It was basically every other week for about a month and a half. Good process, good interactive process, a lot of input from the staff. Some of the types of things that we discussed during these meetings are the lecture lab combination, which is the setting in which science education is delivered today. In days past, it used to be that you would have a lecture in one room and then move to another room for lab setting, but today we do it all in one room. So you have a challenge for rooms that are older in size and somewhat smaller than you would design as new today. And then we also have class sizes of 30 students being put into those spaces. So the rooms you have where we're working are just about 1,200 square feet, so they're decent. They're better than regular-sized classrooms, a little bit larger, and we are able to create a design that will accommodate the 30 students sufficiently. We talked about subject groupings, which is the types of science that we're teaching in each of the rooms. We have 11 rooms we're addressing at the high school, with 1 additional room just getting a teacher demo station. And we started out with 6 rooms at the middle school, but we're now also talking about 10 rooms there, and I'll explain that a little further as we go along. Talked about the student desk types, which is where the students would sit for lecture setting, and typically that's either an individual desk, which is beneficial in a testing setting, versus a paired student table, which might be more flexible for moving into other settings, but then you have paired students during a testing setting. We do have some of each type, and we will explain them as we review the plans. The lab station type, that's the workstations where the students would do their labs. We discussed several different types there, and you'll see the selected type that we have. Services required, and that's each different discipline within the science realm will have different services necessary. We have chemistry and biology. You typically require water, gas, and electric. When you have earth science or physics, for example, you don't necessarily need the gas or the water access. We typically provide minimal access in those type labs for that type of service. Cabinet typology, that's the supporting casework that's involved. You have base cabinets, upper wall cabinets, and tall cabinets, and we talked about, the sizes necessary for the types of items that are stored. It's very important, when you have 30 meter sticks, that you have a drawer that you can fit 30 meter sticks, or the other types of components that are necessary in the lab. Specialty cabinets, this would be, for instance, where we have, you may have microscopes, which again, we have 30 microscopes to store and or 15 in some labs. Specialty services, this would be, for example, emergency gas shutoffs within the labs that have gas, technology, and we talked about board location and type. Typically, we do have some teachers that still favor a chalkboard versus a marker board, and we did talk about that specifically in the middle school. It was a strong feeling in the 8th grade science that they did want to maintain a section of chalk, because the graphics on that in colored chalk turn up much better than they do on the whiteboard with the marker. So, but we do have both surfaces within a sliding multi-surface board. We'll also cover the technology today and the whiteboard necessity. We talked about prep room utilization and design. Although the prep rooms are not particularly a part of this scope, we still need to understand how they function and how they can support the adjacent rooms. We also talked about where the chemicals are stored, how they're housed and kept separate and safe from the students. I'm going to go through some of the designs that you'll see as we progress, and I'm going to start with the high school science rooms. The first slide I have is just a representation of the rooms that we're talking about. This is the ground floor of the center section of the building. We have rooms 30, 31, 34, 35, and 36. These all happen to be biology rooms on the ground floor level. And then on the right above that, they pretty much stack one over one. We have rooms 130, 131, 134, 135, 136, and 138. 130, 134, and 135 are physics. 131 and 136 are chemistry. And 138 is a bio lab. And 135 and 138 will actually also dual function as earth science. Okay. This is just a representation of the existing chemistry and biology labs. Of the 8 of those labs, they're all right now an identical layout, and this was a very common layout for the early 60s. But you'll see the student desks that are placed in here. Typically, rooms at that time would have been designed around 24 students. And today we have 30 in this lab, and you can see that the student desks, which are that central section in here, really don't have a lot of walk space around them, aisle space on the sides. And then you have the lab tables. There are 6, which are typically set up for groups of 4. So 6 4s, you have your 24, and what they wind up doing is just providing an extra student at each of the lab tables to cover the shift to 30. And you actually had, when these rooms were designed, an additional demonstration table. Normal teacher demo station is at the front of the room where the board is. And you had a secondary island placed in there back in the 60s, which is another component in the room. Also does not help support the means of getting around easily when you have the size and the number of students. So that's just a basic layout of the 8 rooms as we have them. And then this next layout is a representation of what we're proposing for room 31 and room 138, which are 2 of the biology rooms. And here what you see, we have again the 30 student desks and chairs. That's what was chosen for this type of room. And what we did here was free up the perimeter, casework for full access and circulation. These are what you would call island labs, and each lab station is set up in an island. The students stand at the lab setting, so there's no complications with stools or chairs getting in the way. It gives them a lot of free circulation. It's a much safer setting to have a standing lab. So these islands would be set at standing height like your kitchen counter, but we do it at 34 inches, which is ADA compliant. You'll see a wheelchair placed in each of the classrooms in a lecture setting as well as in the lab setting. Okay. This little symbol here, that's representing the projector. We'll have each of the rooms will be fitted out with smart technology, whatever the district's path is. We also met with the technology director, was a component of each of the meetings. And you see the adjacent room, each of these rooms has a pair of rooms with a prep room shared in the center, which is a nice arrangement, and that's actually the way we would still do it today. This little area here where you see the door has been made into an alcove. This is a recent code change. SED requires that any room over 1,000 square feet, whether it's existing and we modify it, and if it was designed new, the door needs to swing out into the hallway rather than in. So in order for it not to become an obstruction in the hallway, we need to recess it into the classroom. Okay, so this is what we're going to term an island lab, and this is actually utilized for the two chemistry rooms and 2 of the bio rooms. So of the 8 biochem, you have 4 that would be this island type, and then this second type, which I'm going to describe now, is what we're going to call a flexible lab, flex lab setting. That's for the other 4 rooms. Okay, so this layout is made up of movable tables, and this was developed through input from the staff, a hand sketch they brought to the class. And this is set up similar to the way they brought us the sketch. What they wanted was an environment where they could fit the 30 students in a lab setting that's centrally located within the room, so that they could get a brief lecture and then move right into a lab setting. And each of these tables, which are movable, would have an individual storage cabinet which would house the 2 student microscopes for the students that would be seated at that table. So there's no getting up, going to a microscope cabinet, getting your microscope out, bringing it back to the desk. You know, a little loss of time there to start up the process. They can move right into the lab setting. Another component that was requested here was some additional lab space at the back of the room. So you have, 30 desks and chairs shown here, and we have another 12 shown in the back. And that was, in some instances, as I mentioned, the rooms are dual function. So you may have an AP biology course here, but then they're going to teach a smaller class of genetics that they may need to set up some pre-lab preparation that they would place out on the tables for the other students to utilize in the back, and it can be all set up again in preference of expediency. So this is one layout with this, which just, as I mentioned, it's flexible. And we're going to show you 4 layouts with these same types of tables. And basically, the perimeter becomes support for these rooms. So here you see a sink, and sink. As I mentioned, biology and chemistry, need that water access and gas access. So the gas is provided along the perimeter, water is provided along the perimeter. The dashed lines you see here in these 3 runs represent overhead electric, so that the students, when they're at this setting and they have the microscopes that need to be plugged in, can access power. We're still debating whether we would provide that power through the floor or from ceiling access cord reels. Okay. Second layout I'm going to show you here has those same tables arranged in a lecture setting, just to show that you can move those same desks and chairs into a lecture setting. The stations that were along the back have now moved to the side. So you still have your 15 tables with your 30 students oriented to the front of the room in a lecture setting. And then we, again, have these dozen spare lab tables off to the side. Third layout for that represents all of the lab settings where you need that access to water and gas. So if this is a specific lab occurring in the room where all the students that are at the lab need that access, all of these tables can be brought to the side and, in a sense, appended right to the side cabinetry, and then the students can access the water, and then the gas is placed right at the head of the table here, and they would run the hoses out to the lab table for their Bunsen burners. And because you have those 6 extra tables, you could create a group work area aside from the lab that they could do some focused work as well as at the lab setting. One more layout of this room. This is just an alternative lecture setting where you could set the chairs and desks up in a different type of setting, again oriented to the front with those extra lab stations off to the rear rather than off to the side in this layout. In this one prep room, you see most of the prep rooms said not any work proposed, but we were asked if we could install a dishwasher in this prep room, as the other prep rooms that have shared with biology do already have dishwashers, and this room was constructed without one originally. We'd be placing that adjacent to a sink, so it's most economical. This is a representation of the chemistry room. As I mentioned, the two chemistry rooms also would be done with the island setting. This is showing room 136, which happens to have the chemical storage and prep room directly adjacent to it. It's managed by the chemistry department. Other teachers, if they need, can come down and get in. This is the more sheltered chemicals or more protected chemicals that currently are within a small single locked room that's adjacent to the other. We were asked if we could close that off, access from the classroom, and join them from within the prep room, so there'd be better access from within the existing prep room, as better control of access to that room with the chemicals in it. We are doing a little bit of cabinet change out in this prep room. Right now it has a lot of open shelves, and being that we are relocating doors in here, there was a request that we proposed to replace some of that open shelving with some enclosed casework. Okay, this is the existing physics room as it was designed. And as I understand it, one of the prior staff members did assist in the design of these rooms in a similar form as we're doing today with your current staff back in the 60s. So, and the current physics staff is very happy with the way these rooms function. In physics, you need big tables that you can gang together for running the experiments, and the tables that they have now, which are standing height butcher block tables, function very well for them. So they asked if they could replicate that setting in the third room, which is room 135, this room that's now going to become physics. The other two physics rooms are across the hall, 130 and 134. So this room is representing the existing layout, and it shows right now they have perimeter casework. These tables are not laid out the way they originally were because they're flexible, but again, you have the 30 students. You see they're kind of penned in here, a little crowded. So when we redo this room, we redo it with similar tables. Okay, so you have those large tables, which can be moved around. They're just shown the way they currently like to utilize them because you get that long surface for running acceleration experiments. And then we have the 30 student desks and chairs, now with a full walk aisle around them, full walk aisle around. What you'll notice is that we lost the casework along this wall. We did provide some tall storage, where we previously had countertop and upper casework to supplement some of the casework loss. Also, you'll see that dashed line in here. Back in the 60s, they did provide overhead power, which has worked out very good for the physics group here. Right now, that only runs here across the front and across these two areas. We're going to supplement that and connect it all the way around to give further flexibility within the room. Another nice feature that we did in each of the rooms was to provide a continuous board surface across the whole front of the room. And then in physics, we're also able to run board surface down this whole side. And the staff thought that would be extremely beneficial to the students as they're able to then utilize that board surface to run calculations as they're doing their work. That's it for the high school, and a look at some middle school rooms. Actually, all of the middle school rooms. We'll start on the ground floor. And 8th grade science is currently located in this area, which is rooms G2, G4, G6. We have 2 6th grade rooms that are out in the new wing. Currently, they're in G15 and G23. And we're talking about, would you relocate them, because we need to provide potentially some services there that were not placed when the building was constructed. There was no sinks put in the room. So if you're going to add something like that now, it makes better sense to put the 2 rooms together. We did talk about needing 2 pairs with the folding walls so that you could do your English and social studies teaming, and that could remain connected. So we still maintain those 2 connected pairs. And we believe with the bathrooms here that the plumbing that was put in does exit the building in this area. So putting the 2 rooms there with science and new water would be in the best location to connect to that waistline. Okay, one of the other things that we talked about with the 8th grade science is you have G2 and G6 are really the main 8th grade science rooms, and the G4 is a special ed science room. And what we talked about was reconfiguring the whole space, because the G2 and the G6 are really the larger classrooms and belong adjacent to each other. The G4 is smaller than a regular classroom, but by taking over what's now a resource room and giving that square footage to the three rooms in mass, we're able to make G4 a standard classroom size, but still design it around the special ed 1511, and then also give some additional space to G2 and G6 and make them work better. We'll see that in the layouts as we show the enlarged views. On the first floor, we have rooms 9, 12, and room 102. 9 and 12 are 6th grade rooms. 102 is a 7th grade room. And on the second floor, we have rooms 25 and 23. Those are also 7th grade rooms. The original count of 6 was to address the 7th and 8th grade. As we began talking about these and some other programs that the district has going in the lower grade science in 5th grade, it seemed to make sense to include talking about the 6th grade rooms, although I'll mention now that they were not funded as we're talking originally about 6. So we need to study that as we progress, watch the dollars and cents. The science rooms are going to be done in phases. So there'll be essentially half of the rooms in each building would be done at a time. So we'll be able to gauge the funding, whether there's a fund balance or whether any of the other projects have fund balance to supplement the funding for the 6th grade rooms, or whether they're funded by another means as we progress in time through potentially a budget cycle to supplement. This is one of the larger 8th grade rooms. It's the G6 room, but it would also be, the G2 room would be over here, a mirror image of that. So what we did was design those, as I mentioned earlier, around a shared prep room. So you have the G2 and the G6, 2 big science rooms with their lecture area up front, access to a shared prep room from both rooms, and then a lab setting in the back supporting the 30 students. Okay. The rooms we have in this older building are a little skinny, so you wind up with a very long and narrow room, but with the lecture setting held up in the front of the room, and then when the students are in lab, they're back in this area of the room. So it's really subdivided about the central access, and you're not getting students that are back here trying to look to the board up in front. But the room is about 42 feet long and 22 feet wide. Again, you have perimeter supporting casework here, and we do need to, again, swing that door out as the room is in excess of 1,000 square feet. So that's the 8th grade room. The G4 room, as I mentioned, would be within that same run of rooms, but it would be down the right end of the hallway. So the G6 room is here to that room, and that's set at a regular classroom size to give you flexibility in the future should ever the room utilization need to change, or should you have off periods where you could use it for full classroom instruction. But right now I'm showing seats for 15. The tables would hold 16, but it's a 15-1-1 room, so we have one spare because they're utilizing the paired tables. So in a lecture setting, all the students would be sitting in pairs and oriented to the front of the room. These are those flexible, movable tables, so you have your perimeter support. In a lab setting, they move the tables into paired groupings of 4 along the perimeter, so you can gain access. Here's a sink, and a sink, and you would have your gas, as well as power along the perimeter. So it's a very flexible room layout, and this is a typical not only special ed, but a typical middle school science layout with these flexible layouts. So the first 7th grade room we have is room 102. That was a room that was previously renovated by the district. I'll say, this portion of the room. Right now, there's a wall right here, and this is the prep room in the back of the room. So as you'll see, student desks and chairs for that larger group here, but you have 5 student workstations, which is really insufficient for the number of students in the room, but it was what was able to be provided with the space. So as this was one of the 6 original rooms, which the original report was initiated in 2010, so in between 2010 and the time you voted the bond. The district did fund some work in this room that was done, but now we're going to supplement that by taking the prep room space and providing additional instructional space. And the prep room utilization is supplemented by additional perimeter cabinetry which will hold the storage that was in that room, but then give the floor space to the classroom. So we add the 2 additional student lab stations, and we're also going to provide rolling cabinetry that can go underneath the cabinets that were, the lab tables that were installed by the district, because they have a kick space as if you were going to use those for seated labs, but they are used for standing. So we have an open knee space essentially underneath each of those lab tables that can be used for a rolling storage cabinet. Okay, so you have the 2 additional lab stations, additional perimeter. The blue shading is area of work, and the gray is area that would be existing to remain. One of the 7th grade rooms. The other 2 7th grade rooms are the rooms 23 and 25. Here again in the old building, we're looking to grab additional footage to serve the students wherever we can. And in these rooms, again 22-foot wide rooms, there is a old coat closet or bookstore room that was between the 2 classrooms in 23 and 25, and in 27 it's actually down this end of the room. And one of the things that we proposed to do was to take those 2 closet spaces and take these rooms, which are within the 650, 670 square foot realm, you know, and bring them closer to what today is a regular classroom. Minimum stated guideline is 770 square foot for a standard classroom, much less a science room. But we're adding about 100 square feet to each of these rooms, so 120 square feet, getting closer to that square footage that we need to achieve to serve the students more appropriately. But you know, it caused a loss to these. This closet here is kind of underutilized. It was narrow and just 10-inch shelves and just used for storage. But again, with piecework into the room that will house the storage and giving the additional footprint to the classrooms. Here you have, these rooms will be designed identically. We have the lecture setting shown on the left and the lab setting shown on the right. These rooms previously were renovated, I believe in the early 90s, and they have a small island sink, and they do utilize these student lab tables that are movable. I call them utility tables. It's a chemically resistant top on an oak 4-leg base, but it wasn't set for the 30 students, so it's a little crowded in the room, again with the smaller square footage. What we're doing is eliminating some of the sink bases, so we give better circulation to the lab, you know, to the student setting in the lecture setting as well as in the lab setting. But when you pair those students in the lab groupings of 4, they do each have access to the water and gas by this island sink station that would have power, gas, and water. And then we do have a couple of students that are around the perimeter to catch our 30, but there is also a sink back here, gas, and power as well. So really, the additional square footage is kind of necessary to make these rooms function better and to really serve the number of students we want to place in the rooms. Room 27 remains a regular classroom size. It's a little bigger than it is. Right now it's about 640 square feet. We gave it a little extra square footage to try and, again, even as a regular classroom, boost it up a little bit. But you know, it then gave the bulk split between the 2 other rooms to, you know, science has that higher demand with the lecture and lab setting. This is room 12 shown here, and room 9 is very similar. And they both also have that closet, which is designated by this area here right now. That closet runs across the room. And if we don't take that closet, I wouldn't recommend using these rooms for more than 24 students. We certainly very tight with the paired student tables, even taking the space to fit the 30. So, but you see, we do have them fitting with full circulation between and around in the group of 15 tables, full perimeter support, casework, teacher demo. In the middle school, they chose to select a sliding multi-surface board. As I mentioned, the chalk surface as a rear surface there, and then 2 sliding marker surfaces for the 8th grade. The other rooms would be all marker. But it gives, additional board space that can do lesson planning and set up some labs and then roll a panel aside and have additional workspace. So the lower plan shows the lab setting where the tables are moved to the side and grouped in the lab setting that then has access between for water. The 6th grade rooms in this area of the building, there is not gas currently, and we would not be bringing that service to this area. It's minimally utilized in the 6th grade science, and they do have alternative means of providing access to that type of facility when necessary. I did, indicate here that rooms 9 and 12 were not included in the original scope, and we need to consider the funding of those as we're discussing. So 9 and 12 very similar, and I just also showed, this is that in the new wing, the other 2 6th grade rooms, which is G25 and G27, also shown with the lecture setting at the top and the lab setting at the bottom, very similar. And what we did here was only provide one common wall. This right now is the folding wall. We would replace that with a permanent wall and then run the plumbing along that, both sides. And then from the teacher demo station, which also gets a sink, that would come and they would all connect at this point, go out into the hall and then out of the building. So we kind of minimize run 2 L's of new waste and connect to the existing. Anybody want to have questions on the science? I'll just continue through the auditorium and we'll take all questions at the end. Keep going? Okay. So now we're going to talk about the auditorium design. And we met with the staff 3 times in both groups in 4-hour sessions, 2 hours for the middle school and 2 hours for the high school, June 2nd, June 8th, and June 16th. Again, we had input from theatrical, music staff, as well as the technology group and administrative input through the principals. The type of topics we talk about in the auditorium design, current utilization of the space, for board meetings, for example, for theatrical use, for concerts, for outside groups, for jazz ensembles, for presentations, sports meetings, all the different utilizations we went through. We talked about the current concerns with the facility and with the participation in the music area that you have within the district. One of the biggest concerns was, fitting all the kids up on the stage and in the pit area so that they could perform for the audience before them. And difficult, when we're working within an existing facility, existing stage size, but that's one of the main concerns, as well as the lighting and at the middle school, the provision of lighting, sound, and the rigging, the curtains, whereas the high school you've had work done already on your curtain system, so we're in pretty good shape there. Musical performances, theatrical performances, each of these are spoken about individually in addition to a generalized overview in the beginning. The lighting systems, we did bring in Barbizon, who is our theatrical sound and lighting consultant, to meet with the staff. One of those meetings was dedicated solely to that purpose, and hearing and listening and talking about the progressive technology that can be brought to the room. For items, his request was a bigger screen, which would help you to see the graphics as you're towards the rear of the room in here. Acoustics in the room. This room has pretty much hard plaster sidewalls, so you get a lot of sound bouncing around, some reverberation, as well as a hard ceiling setting. And then you also in the middle school, in the older room, you have similar treatments there. We utilize Jaffe Holden as our acoustical consultant. They're out of Connecticut. They're a well-known firm. They work on many of the theaters in the city. So great group of guys, and they're going to come and measure the acoustics here and give us guidance for how we make it fine-tune the rooms within their existing settings. We talked about the seating in each of the buildings. You have a more historical look over at the middle school. We talked about what's called the aisle standard, which is on each of the end of the rows. That's the end piece. In the middle school, you have a cast iron aisle standard, which has a decorative motif to it. And whether or not you would keep that and reutilize it, or at least do something similar to maintain the historical integrity of the feel of the room. Now, if you try and reutilize the existing, it becomes a predicament in trying to remove them, ship them out to the Midwest to get them refurbished, and then get them back with the new seats. So you wind up having to take them out midway through the year. They do make a very similar cast iron standard with the same motif, and you can purchase those new. That way the seats would remain in place throughout the year. If we're talking about the auditoriums as a summer project, and then the new would come along with the new seats. Here at the high school, you do also have a building of a certain time period with a certain feel to it, kind of a streamlined, modern look to it. Irwin Manufacturing, who is one of the larger seating manufacturers, does still make these aisle standards. If we want to keep that feel to this room, or whether or not you want to go with something more contemporary. We also did talk about the wood back existing chairs with upholstered center sections on the back and upholstered seat at the middle school to keep that historic appearance. And then here at the high school, we talked about Irwin's marquee seat, which has a little taller back, a little more comfortable, and still an upholstered seat. Interesting component as you're talking about seating, we have older theaters. I'm sure many of you have been to Broadway theaters where your knees are crunched up against the seat in front of you. Many times seats were 18 inches wide back then, and they were spaced a lot closer together. You do happen to have seats that are spaced closer together. Today's current code is 2'10" back to back. Both the high school and the middle school have 2'8" back to back. That's something we need to correct to current code as we move through. So you do lose seating capacity as you're bringing the space to code. And also we talk about comfort in the seating. Is an 18-inch seat appropriate today in terms of making a more comfortable auditorium? You do have some of the seats here in the high school on these side banks. You'll see some of the rows have 7 seats, some of the rows have 8 seats. The rows with 8 are those narrow seats. And also, by current code today, on a side aisle such as this, you're not permitted to have more than 7 seats before you reach an aisle. So we'll have another code correction and a loss of a certain number of seats in that area. Talked about heating and air conditioning. This facility already is air conditioned, and we'll be bringing air conditioning to the middle school as another funded section of the bond. We talked about the support spaces, which you have around the perimeter, and connections to band rooms, and how you move things in and out, prop storage, et cetera, as we talk about those spaces. So now we'll look at some of the plans, existing and proposed, starting with the high school. So stage area, this is your pit area, and again the existing seating. Something you can see here in plan, another element, that the aisles are wider at the rear, and then they taper as you get to the front. And up in the very front, they again fall below the current code required minimum, so we have a loss of a seat there in the front. Current seating is 680 in this room, but in discussing with the staff, when you do theatrical and music performances, you typically blank out the last 3 rows to put your sound and lighting console there. So that's 45 seats loss from the 680. And then they also tape off the whole front row, which is another 26 seats, because the choral risers, come out into the pit area, and the students actually stand on the floor, and then the 3 steps of risers end up on the stage. So it's really right up out against that first row, and it's not utilized. So you're actually using 609 available of the 680 seats that are in the room. We also did discuss that there are not many times when the room is in a sellout situation. There are other meetings that do happen within the space that do have that demand for additional seating, but in that instance you wouldn't have the choral risers in the pit area, and we did talk about the potential to bring in folding chairs to supplement the seating that we wind up with in counts. This graphic here is just showing all of the current rigging line sets, and we have the balance curtain up top, the main proscenium curtain. There are 2 intermediate full draw curtains, as well as 3 electric runs, and then the rear scrim. Most of that has been worked on. There was a request to replace the rear scrim because it's too tall and they can't really get it fully out of the way. So that's what we're looking at with the theatrical group. And I'll just show you, really the only planned development here we have is looking at the seating layout and exploring counts there. Now this is showing, it's 125, right? 125 chairs up on the existing stage. Your band groups here are 65, 70, and 80 to 90, so they're not reaching that numbers, but sometimes they do perform in a combined group, and you can achieve, these higher numbers. You happen to have a nice depth here in the high school, 28 feet from this back line of the proscenium back, which is a good depth. And the concern was down here. This is representing the choral risers, which right now they say they run from one side of the room to the other, and you need to have the piano down in the front for the conductor, so you have a row of students standing, as well as students up on the stage. So this layout actually shows the adjusted configuration of the seating, kind of held within the existing perimeters. So these rows, where you currently have 22 in the center, it's now showing 20 rows. And on the sides, you have 24, and we'd be showing 22. So the overall seating count you're going to see here when you look at your copy is 594. And I'm going to compare that to the 609 rather than the 680 for use in the theatrical setting. So really, it's 15 different in a usable setting, as they're in that performance setup. And then we did talk about what's shown here in the dashed lines is to bring in folding chairs when you may have what I believe the sports meeting is, I believe, one of the bigger meetings of the year, and was showing an additional 30 seats brought in, or 36, I'm sorry, which would bring the count to 630 for the space. And if the riser's not in here, you could supplement that even further with additional folding chairs if necessary. We are talking about constructing a light and sound booth across that rear aisle, which is really a standing room space now behind the wall. It's underutilized. So we'll take advantage of it to build a platform and give you back these 3 rows that are currently, taped off when you're doing a performance. Middle school auditorium. Again, this is just an existing plan showing the existing layout of the seats. And I don't remember the count. 139, I believe. As the middle school has a balcony, 1,200 students in the building, you're not able to sit the whole population in either facility, and typically that's not the way it would be designed. Typically, you would do 2 presentations and sit at least half. So you have, I believe, 839 seats in the middle school. Concern here again was the pit area in front for choral utilization. This stage is not as deep as the stage we have at the high schools, but again, we're not looking at working outside of the current box, so there's really no way to physically enlarge the stage or enlarge the size of the house. We need to bring the row spacing up to code, and then here, in talking with the staff with the current seating, they, what was the optimum seating in terms of talking about creating a better pit space and better room utilization. The staff said after bantering about for a while, that they would be willing to sacrifice the first 3 rows at least, in order to make a better setting for the students. So when we go to, this represents the balcony seats. Okay. Going to look at the proposed here. We show a band and or orchestra layout completely filling the stage. We talked about expanding the stage out into the room with a platform that could be a temporary platform or a permanent construction. Right now it's shown as temporary. That's one of the items we're going to continue to dialogue with staff as we proceed, whether that should just become permanent because the stage is going to be small whenever you want to use it theatrically or for the musical groups. At the middle school, you have a baby grand down in the pit area, and again, the coral risers extend all the way across the front. So by changing the row spacing here, we lose 2 rows going forward, similar to the high school. And with this facility, having those 18-inch seats, we did represent them with an average of 20, which normally when you set a row, you do a mix of 19, 20, and 21 now, and that mix of seat width creates the offset to the person in front of you, so your heads are not in direct alignment. But hardly ever do we do an 18-inch seat today. So there's a loss of approximately 59 seats to achieve that comfort level, and then the 2 whole rows, which I believe was 70, in getting the row spacing there. Did talk about backstage area, which right now is broken up into a group of small vestibule spaces, mechanical spaces, and rooms that are really underutilized. Joining those together to make one big overall storage space that has the one set of double doors, closing the access off to the stairways there that are not utilized, and accessing the stairs up to the small dressing rooms via the secondary access that's already provided. Again, both rooms would receive acoustical treatments around their perimeter. Typically, we would line the back wall with fabric-clad acoustical panels, which gives you absorption, because a reflective surface is just going to bounce the sound back and create a reverberation within the room. Show the upper balcony level. We talked about creating the lighting and sound control platform up in the balcony there. We're also talking about whether we would take the old projection room and demolish that to give you a little additional space up here at Provision. We need to talk about the line sets there, which is the rigging at the middle school, which is short by today's standards, short of the number of line sets and the quantity and quality for lighting, as well as the curtains. And also up in the balcony, you do have a relatively large area in the back that's flat. And we did show a row of folding chairs that you could place there if you needed some additional seats. We did also show on the lower floor, again, folding chairs that could be brought in if you needed to supplement when the risers are not in place. That's a quick overview of the 2 facilities, science and auditorium. So I'll take any questions. We're proposing to submit the plans to State Education Department, I believe in September, which would put us online. Right now, the state is currently at a over 30-week review time, but the hope is to be able to bid these the following spring for construction in the summer of 16.
Yeah, thanks. Couple of questions. In the high school and I guess the middle school, who moves the tables so that they are configured in different ways? How long does it take? How is the hookup to the gas and water achieved?
Different facilities do it by different means, whether you choose to utilize the students to move the tables, or whether they need to be set up in the lab before they come into the room. Sometimes the staff will have custodians move the tables, but that's going to be the district's decision on how they get those moved. I do recommend, if the students are moving them, because it is a chemically resistant epoxy resin top, the tables weigh about 110 pounds each, so it's not a single person move. You need to have that lab group move the 2 tables that they're moving, so just so it's a safer move. The gas at the perimeter is a nozzle gas jet, which they would connect the hose to and run it out onto the table. And then the power is going to be, as well as technology, in a raceway that's run along the perimeter that you can simply plug into a quad receptacle or into the technology jack for computer utilization.
Okay, so basically they can be done on the fly, but that wouldn't be necessarily be ideal.
Well, like getting up and getting a microscope,
Right.
you get up and move your table. So
Okay.
it does take a little bit of time to shift around the room, but typically a lab period is more than a single period. You have a
Right,
period and a half sometimes.
right. My point is they don't have to like put a work order into the custodians a week before they want to have it changed or
No,
anything like that.
no,
Okay.
no.
In G4 at the middle school, that is under 1,000 feet, but I'm wondering with the likelihood that there would be people in that room who might have movement difficulties, whether we would still want that door to open outward instead of inward, if there were an emergency and people had to vacate the room.
The direction of the swing access, it's still a fully accessible door. It has the appropriate clearances on the sides for wheelchair access. So it's not required, but if the district felt that that may be more convenient because of the nature of the students in the room, we certainly could swing that door out as well.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking if somebody's standing in front of the door trying to get out and the door has to open and then 10 people have to back up for them to get out because they panicked and ran toward the door, it'd be nicer if it opened
Opening in
out.
the direction of exit is always a good thing.
Right. Also in G4, there are often other adults in the room, so it isn't really 15-1-1.
Yes.
There might be additional aides. Is there room for the aides at the lab stations and at the lecture stations and everything else to help the students?
Yeah, normally, as I said, that room has been made a full-size classroom. So there is, there will be sufficient space for the aides. I didn't show additional chairs in the room, but certainly you could bring additional chairs into the room and place them at each of the lab settings for that assistance.
Thanks. Now, it's a more global question. Right now, the Weber rooms seem to be equipped for every type of science. Would it be more efficient if we had rooms set up for chemistry, biology, physics, whatever, and had the kids rotate rather than have the rooms be able to do everything?
Well, that's just the thing with middle school science. You do touch on each of the subject areas typically, and we do have, as I said, the gas provided for 7th and 8th grade, not for the 6th grade. So it is a little bit specialized in terms of the focus of the age of the students. And I do believe you also work in the way the building is set up in the houses and the groupings, that the way they move about the building, the 7th and 8th grade areas, and 6th grade specifically. I don't know if that would work in reconfiguring the housing of the students. But it's certainly something we could continue to talk about if administration and staff would like to, certainly.
Okay. Some of the rooms are still ending up undersized. And in looking forward that we get to these rooms every 50 or 60 years, we have to be looking way forward, and we don't really know what science curriculum is going to look like in 50 or 60 years. Would it make any sense to have more movable walls in there and be able to adjust and perhaps open it up into a single room if we need to, or do anything like that?
Well, when you add the movable walls, you take away your fixed component that is providing that perimeter support where your gas and water is when you need to run those services. So it becomes a bit of a quandary as to what wall can become movable, and also whether or not you can schedule to take an adjacent classroom at any time during the period of the day. We have a building of 1,200 students, and I didn't see the thought of, well, hey, we can just give up a classroom that can be split in half between the two science rooms. It was more of shift this over to take the closet because we're really tight on space as it is for regular instructional rooms. So, but certainly consideration if we want to look into that further.
I just, in 50 or 60 years, we could have a 2,200 person middle school or an 800 person middle school. We have no idea. So,
we're not adding space.
Right. My last question on Weber is it possible to use propane in the 6th grade classrooms, or is there regulations against bringing in tanked gas or anything like that if we wanted to give them the ability to have a Bunsen burner?
So the staff had a way of doing it. I'm not sure if it's propane, but it's canned, a canned utilization.
Okay, so we could do that. So if gas did become a problem in any of these areas, we could always just go that way.
You also have Bunsen burners hot plates that they utilize, which will be providing sufficient power for heating element.
And then one question on this auditorium. You're planning on putting the sound and light booth there against that back wall?
Yes.
So that would mean if you came in this door, you couldn't sneak over to the other side in the back? Right?
Yes.
So we'd have to actually do it through an aisle or do it up front? Okay. All right, thanks.
As we did talk about whether or not you would open up the existing projection booth further and do it up there, but really it's felt to be in the room and hear the sound that's in the room is the better way to do it than being in a separate space.
Right, no, I understand all of that. I was just, wondering,
you'd
you
have
come
to-
in,
if
you
you
come
did-
in and you see your friend over there and you just
You have
want to
to go
dart
back
across
out into
that
the
back
lobby and come across.
to get there, yeah, so that was the only,
Unless you're comfortable with walking down to the front and around.
right, okay, thank you.
On the Schreiber Science Labs, I don't know if I missed something, but were they all being developed to be flex rooms or just some of them? I know I saw the part where I didn't know if some of the earlier ones that you showed up there were not flexible, or do they all have the movable
There's
desks?
basically three types, okay? The physics rooms are their own type. There's
Yeah.
3 physics rooms. There's 8 remaining rooms, which are bio and chem, and there's 4 of each type. 4 of them have the island centers, and 4 of them would have the flexible layout. So either type could be used for any discipline. So really, you have 8 biochem, earth.
Right, okay, yeah, the physics, yeah, I said that the physics were different. When you say that there's the water access and the gas access around the perimeter, is that where the students go to use the water and the gas? Or because I got a little confused by the response to Larry's question before about, is it being piped over to those desks, or is it kids are mobile and moving and doing the work they have to do by the perimeter where the water and the gas are?
That's what I was talking about, that you would take that table from a lecture setting when you need the gas, or when they have that center island setting. You move it over to the perimeter, and then you have your 4 students in a lab group right up against the perimeter cabinet, able to reach the gas right here. So, but they do need to connect a hose to that to run it out to in front of them, which is where they want to have the Bunsen burner. So it gets connected by a hose to right, but they're not running a hose across to the middle of the room. It's right on top of the table. It's a couple of feet.
So I figured that wasn't the way that we were going to do it.
Nope.
But there's enough room so that the tables could be moved closer to the perimeter and the hoses could just run to those tables, and that would accommodate the 30 students?
Yes.
Okay.
That's in the Flex Lab layout, that'll be the 3rd page, where it shows the 30 students all around the perimeter in an L shape, all with access to gas and water.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. A few questions. Most of our science classes today at Schreiber are exceeding 30 students. And so we've drawn layouts now, but if we were to go down the list of a lot of the classes, we're sitting with 33, 34, 35, and I even think we've touched 36. We have certain waves of populations coming through if we go down into the elementary schools, that when those arrive here, we will have necessarily or calculable another 100, 150 kids more than we have today in the buildings potentially, which will only further strain those classrooms. Have we taken a look at what we're going to do to put 34 and 35 in these rooms that we're now going to spend roughly $300,000 a piece on?
Well, as I said, the rooms were originally sized for 24, and we're pushing it going to 30. What we had discussed as normal population was in the 28 range, sometimes achieving 30. I didn't hear specifically that they're going over 30 in many instances. It's not recommended to bring more than 30 students into those rooms. You could probably place an additional chair at the end, or have an additional student stand at the end of the lab setting, which we're already squeezing them in to get to the 30. But if we design new science rooms today, we design them 1,400 square feet to 1,600 square feet to serve 24. And you're serving 30 in less than 1,200 square feet.
I simply wanted to add that there was serious consideration to these concerns as we met with the building principals and the instructors. And there is a concern for safety relative and a limitation of existing space within the framework of this bond. If we start knocking down walls between classrooms, we're exceeding our budget before we get to SED. But certainly the principal is aware that these rooms are being designed for a maximum of 30 students, and class sections will have to be developed to not far exceed that number for safety reasons and space considerations in general.
Just following on Mary's comment, if sufficient money were there, would we absorb some of the prep rooms then into the actual classrooms and shrink those or do something else to gain additional classroom space?
One of the things we did talk about, for the era in which these rooms were designed, you have generous prep room spaces. Typically today, we would design them as a single prep room would be approximately 9 feet wide by the length of the room. You have 16-foot wide prep rooms. So we did talk about whether we would take those walls down and bring that to a smaller prep room size. But they're also not only used as prep rooms, they're used as staff offices and resource space. So there's an educational component to that room where the students are using it for resource utilization. There's also the departmental office as well as the staff offices. But that is a potential.
And
whether you would eliminate a prep room or shrink them.
Right, or would it make sense in one or two cases to build bigger rooms so when we inevitably have larger sections, we could try to schedule them in a couple of the rooms that we would already have pre-built larger, rather than to some degree making them all within that 1,200-foot standard. It doesn't make any sense to go to, if it were possible, and I don't even know, I'm making it up, 1,400 or 1,500 square feet in two of them by potentially doing that with the prep rooms to pick up another 100, 150 square feet to give us some more flexibility.
If you take prep room space, you can make the rooms bigger. So through the process, it was decided that there was no funding for taking space of the prep room, so we kind of held to the program that was.
No, understood. I mean, I'm just raising it just as not an all or nothing, but
certainly
possibly
an opportunity.
Something in between.
We did also try and minimize the number of different room types for an economy of scale in terms of casework uniformity, and that they're all flexible. The flexible labs and the islands would all be able to have a certain approach rather than having, at one time we had 6 different layouts for 11 different rooms, which was a little extreme. Go ahead.
Just for clarification, did we not take part of a prep room at the middle school, though, in one of those areas to enlarge?
In the middle school, in room 102, we're taking the entire prep space.
Right. So we
And
are doing it at the middle school.
Yeah, in the 6th grade rooms, we're taking the old storage closet, essentially, which may have been a coat closet, a book room, so forth, to enlarge those rooms. That's not achieving a high school setting, much bigger room. Generally, science education, they recommend, especially at the upper levels, keeping the numbers down in the classrooms just for safety purposes. You do have one teacher in the room with quite a number of students, and experiments that they do take place do have chemicals involved and flame involved. Better to keep those numbers lower if you can.
And weren't some of those decisions made on the basis of that The high school classrooms are already larger, certainly, than the middle school classrooms were, and that's why we took prep rooms at the middle school.
The high school rooms are about 1,200. We have rooms that are down in the 600 range in the middle school.
This is sort of a red herring, and I'll admit to it before I even ask it. What's not included because of budgetary constraints? That if we imagine that there was, I'll make up the number, another $100,000 a room for the 20 or so rooms, are there things that we're not doing that make educational sense? And that's why I say it's a red herring. I know we've got $70 million and everything else, but I'm just trying to get a feel if there's stuff that we're already not doing because we've got $70 million.
The funding that's allotted to the rooms that were designated in the bond is sufficient to make these rooms future ready and somewhat future proof. The money that was set for the middle school for the 6th grade rooms, which doesn't exist, which is a place where we're short. Right. And if additional funding could be placed to those rooms, that's where you would need it to bring your program, because you're talking about doing some things in the 5th grade. We've skipped over 6th grade and jumped to 7th and 8th, so it would make your program more holistic if we could address those 6th grade rooms.
Going to the auditoriums now, where does the big cost come from? Because we've sort of allocated for the 2 big ones $1 million of allocable resource, if you will, and we're sort of not changing, if you will, the 4 walls and the roof, but more the seating area.
Yeah. So he's going to get some interior design in terms of the paint job, that we'll get in terms of acoustical treatments as well,
Right.
fabric clad panels. You already have beautiful proscenium curtain. The seats themselves, each seat of this type is around $300. So you have 600 seats, 300 seat. That's a good component. We also have the lighting and sound system, full sound system replacement here, and lighting supplement. Although you did the curtains, the 3 light bars in the back there are poor at best, and the lighting up in here, they can't access to control these lights. So we're talking about potentially a motorized light truss that can be lowered and raised in here. So it's really the theatrical sound lighting component that will be a big expense that may achieve nearly $500,000 in each of the 2 rooms. And then the seats is the other big component. If we're going to be constructing anything like the light booth, whether we take down the projection booth at the middle school, that would be a little more demolition work. The stage flooring at the middle school is in poor condition, needs to be ripped up and replaced, where here at the high school it looks like we could sand and refinish it, change the coloration. Really those technological support components that support the use of the room are going to be your larger expenses. We did talk about potentially having, use of this room as part of the TV studio, and be able to have potentially a 3-camera setup in here that you could live stream performances. So.
In the auditorium here in particular, are we planning any major work in the wings on both sides here?
Well, replacement of the antiquated dimmer system, which resides in both of the wing spaces. It would be a component of refinishing the floor, of course, would go throughout the whole back area. Whether or not supplemental rigging components are necessary for the loading bridge and the rigging that's on this wall in the back here, there is a gap between the last scrim and the last electric and rear curtain, about 6 feet. So, if you wanted to have additional piping in there, there's space for it, could be added, which then would run over and into the wing space. The flexibility in terms of, flying curtains out of the way so that you can get fully open there as much as you can for view into when you have those 120-plus groups of students up there. That's involving them actually standing in the wing space because they're going to be filling it. Hopefully, you're not the parent over here whose student winds up. My son played bass, so I always had a tough time seeing him on the corner.
The plans show a certain amount of wheelchair slots allocated. Is there a formula for that?
Yes,
by code?
that's by code, yes.
Okay.
It goes with the count of seats, and the minimum number is represented. We also have to provide assistive listening devices for hearing impaired. That would, again, be a number per code.
Okay. And to Larry's point, where we're now going to sort of close off the back here, have we had any discussions what we're going to do with the existing booth, or is that being refurbished into the school in some way, or does it become dead space? Or, I mean, it is usable. Do we have anything in mind already for that?
Well, they were looking for more storage space for costume and support of the components, so I don't know if they'd want to give it up back to the building, or, no, we haven't talked specifically about how the space would be reutilized up there.
Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you all, Jim, our Jim, and Mary, and Jim, and Frank, and Larry, when we were going through this process, and all the tours, and all the discussion before the bond vote, and I would keep contacting BBS about, people want to know about this, and people want to know about that, and I kept being reassured that you did have specialists in auditorium, and sound and lighting, and you were going to confer with our staff, and I know the science departments met with you endlessly, and Kevin with the arts department, and I just want to thank you because the presentation tonight, clearly you know our school district, and you've spoken to our people, and you've been able to answer all of our questions, so thank you very much for the presentation and coming here.
Well, thank you, and in turn, thanks to the staff, because they gave us a great participation and great input, and it only helps the project in the long run. So we really need to, be your eyes and ears and hear all of that, take it in, and give you back what you need, what you hope for. I didn't hear it when we were walking up and you were making the point. SED is 30 weeks behind, and we plan Not behind. Their review process
right
now is over 30 weeks. It is behind in all of our minds when we would hope it was 6 to 8 weeks.
And when did we think we were going to send drawings?
September.
September.
Yeah.
So it's 7.5 months. So September.
Put us around March.
Puts about March,
yeah,
April.
which is good time for bidding
right.
For summer work, and we want to be in that time frame because these guys take more than a month to make. So we need to be, we're going to be having seats fabricated for you that you can, sit in, try them out. There's a couple of different manufacturers, but from the time that you order a seat, they need to submit shop drawings to us, shop drawing review. Then it needs to go on a fabrication line. If you're ordering them in April, or they'll just about make the beginning of August arriving to the site to be installed for the start of school.
Yeah, and one of the points that came up in talking about the science rooms was the cabinetry.
Same process.
That there was a long lead time in
Yes.
that order cycle.
Many times with these components, we do go through a BOCES route or state contract, because you have the benefit that they've already been bid, and they would also furnish discounts that are built into their pre-bid numbers, and it gives you the ability to select a certain product that you may have liked when we are going to bring you chairs to sit in and test out. You may like, one manufacturer more than another. Say, this is the seat we have. He's already on the BOCES bid. We can purchase that directly and get them off the manufacturer while we're bidding out our general construction work, electrical, mechanical, plumbing. So we will bring you and potentially have tours of other facilities if you want to see casework in place. We have Oyster Bay, which is right nearby, and other school districts which are nearby where we've done science rooms and auditoriums that you could go look at. The manufacturers will also bring their casework and do a presentation of their wares so that you can see the bigger representatives and that casework kick the tires in a sense.
Just to remind everybody, one of the points was that we would have to buy it all up front for all the rooms, Because we wouldn't want it to be different.
We
as
are
far as
doing
I
it in
remember.
phases, and, you know, that's one of the good things. It is a large quantity of casework, so that you can get commitments from the manufacturers to purchase
the
the whole,
style and color
hold their price for time, and they will also, if they need to fabricate it and store it as well, so that it's available and ready to go in when necessary.
I just realized a question I had, actually two. Once we are approved by SED, how much time do we have before we have to begin the project? How long is the approval good for?
The State Education Department permit process, you know, once you have your building permit, it's been issued. It's not like the local health department expires in 6 months or
Okay.
permit's going to be in place. We're going to want to get the work started right away, so your approval will be in place for phase 1 as well as phase 2.
Right, because we had just talked about in committee, so I just wanted to confirm that we're putting in a lot of work. We may not be able to do it all next summer based on our funding and our stages of our borrowing. So I just wanted to make sure about that. And then the same process that was done with the auditoriums and the science labs will be done with the fields, correct? You'll be,
Yes.
and do you know
Yeah,
when?
we did talk about that. There's one of the fields we want to get going up in this first phase, and we did actually, as we were finishing the last group of meetings, talk about trying to scheduling, I think it was that athletic director, to talk about the field so that we can tie it in
Okay, great.
to that process.
Okay.
Do the same process. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
You're
much
very
again.
welcome. Thanks for having us.
All right, I'm going to move to the action items because we have no committee reports. So items A1 through D23. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson? All in favor? 5-0. Thank you. I would just like to thank the Richard Boyle Memorial Scholarship Fund, the Schreiber High School HSA, and the Port Washington Paraprofessional Association for their generous donations to our school district. And I will move the committees. Item 11 in its entirety. Do I have a second? Ms. Johnson, all in favor? Come on, 5-0. Mr. Bear was trying to infer that he didn't want to be on the budget committee, and we had to give him a talking to. Do we have any old business this evening? New business? New business, Mr. Bear.
I think we have to put on the agenda a serious class size discussion based on the information that was presented tonight about science populations, because we have had the discussion last October, November, when the high school folks came in. We saw the list of classrooms with the number of kids that are over, and we are now committing millions of dollars to building facilities that, without some clear policy and structure for a go-forward, in quotation marks, high school, we will immediately overwhelm the classrooms we're building if we continue with the present structure of first choice, or whether it's honors or AP or whatever classes that we're building. We are going to overwhelm what we're now going to try to construct, and the two sort of go like this. And I think we've got to address that sooner than later.
So just to clarify, though, you don't mean the board class size policy per se, but you mean the way class sizes are being constructed in the high school specifically? Okay.
That we have to hash that out now before, if those plans are going in September and then we're going to come back and bid it and do the work, we need to have already agreed that September of 16 classes should look like X to go in those rooms, or we're going to have 34 and 35 kids again, and no seats for them to sit in.
We'll now have another opportunity for the community to be heard.
Hi again, I'm still Adrienne Sauer. I was glad to hear Mr. Bayer, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Greenstein's questions about the design of the science labs, especially with regard to the prep room space, general flexibility, design, and ability to accommodate our current class sizes. I have a few additional questions about the renovations that I hope will be addressed before the plans are sent to SED. Given the larger class sizes and facility space constraints our district has at the high school and middle school, it seems more logical, I think, to design most, if not all, science rooms with the hybrid multifunctional lecture lab furniture rather than the separate lecture and lab spaces. So I was just wondering whether the teachers that prefer the more traditional environment from the 1960s saw the classrooms with the newer hybrid environment, or did they select the lab environment with which they're familiar? If you haven't seen the more modern, you just go with what you're comfortable with. Would it be possible for them to see, if they haven't seen these rooms, would it be possible for them to see some before proceeding? Could they go visit the classrooms in Oyster Bay that were mentioned, or some of the other districts out there? Since it's been close to 50 years since these science labs were redone, we need to make sure that these labs will last, have room for growth, and are designed for the future. Plus, I would think that there would be a financial savings in a single hybrid set of furniture versus a separate set of lecture furniture and another set of lab furniture. So please give further thought to the science lab design before approving the plans and sending them to SED. Thank you.